May it please your Royal Highness, Excellency, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, we started a little bit earlier, so my speech is not going to be long because this is actually not my view to begin with. It is an honor to be here among intellectuals and give a keynote speech to this learned audience. I feel, of course, very honored, yet it is with heavy heart that I accept to give this speech, considering that this is not my field, and it is a difficult mission to act because I have to cope up with all the scopes of Her Majesty's work, which from now on I would address as the Queen or the Queen Grandmother to make it a little bit shorter. Maybe they actually invited me because I'm old enough to give a keynote speech, and actually I have one or two things to make an excuse and hope that you will execute me because of that. I don't have any PowerPoint because every time I use it, the power was taken from me, so I stopped using PowerPoint because I couldn't remember what I want to say when they use PowerPoints. And the other thing is that I don't have any handouts because it's so drafty that I couldn't show it to you. And the third one is actually my English is not that good, so bear with me of my clumsiness and all that. So now this is not my field, altogether. Talking about women intellectuals or emergence of heritage. It belongs to sociology or cultural studies. My field is textual study as Ajahn Surapipan has kindly introduced, and I always consider myself a student of Sanskrit, and you couldn't be expert on Sanskrit, I'm sorry to say that. And the concept of intellectual and the intellectuality is not within my research or anything. I have to actually recourse, or maybe using a negative term, resort. I don't know why resort becomes so important in Thailand. You have a lot of resorts, but as a verb, it's probably very negative in a sense. You have a way to wriggling around and doing something. So I look at the dictionaries, encyclopedias, and of course I Google. Everybody has to do that nowadays. And to what I find is that in cleaning through all that definitions in the dictionary, a set of vocabularies prop up. And this is a thing that I wouldn't bother you with reading the definition from the dictionary. I got something like thinking and reasoning, intelligence, seriously, and impact on society, humanities prop up from time to time. So I think it's all inclusive in the meaning of intellectual and intellectualities, or one might say intellectualism, that it has three or four aspects that you have to think about. One is the rationalities, and the other thing is knowledge. And I would include something like good management and doing good for some other people, that we will expand on that later. And the other thing is that my intelligence is not enough actually to do the justice to the Queen Grandmother's intellectuality anyway. So I would not use much of your time. I probably don't exceed 30 minutes. If I exceeded, please raise your hand and say, I have enough of you, and I would step down. So I would like, therefore, to start the talk with a definition and the history of the term, emphasizing more to the Eastern cultures, I hope so, particularly Thai, and answerable to the topic of this conference, focusing more on the women intellectual, and the later part would be on the Queen Grandmother as a leading intellectual. The term intellectual, if denote a person, has a positive meaning. But if it denotes a group, it has a rather negative meaning. I don't know why. But it was so. I traditionally, intellectuals, in the traditional society, Western or Eastern, maybe where they are sitting here, monks and priests and all that. But right now we are all here, I mean, consider ourselves intellectuals. But I mean, in the meaning, if you look at the Oxford English Dictionary, that huge thing, right now it's 24 volumes, and they have one that not shortened down, minimized, and you have to have a looking glass, look to it. There's a book which is called New Keywords, a Revised Vocabulary of Culture and Society. When you look at the word, I mean, I have to quote them because I'm not an expert on that. This is what he said. Intellectual denoting a category of people whose social status rests on their claim to intellectual expertise. And in parentheses, but who are not simply writers, philosophers, or artists. Closing the parenthesis, dates from this circa 19th century and seems to have served at first primarily to mock those who, lacking particular training or skills, aspire to a generalized knowledgeableness and to the authority it brings with it. So at first it was used mockingly. It is perhaps no accident that the Oxford English Dictionary's earliest reference in this sense is Byron's put down on women with pretensions of learning. So women intellectuals rather, Byron has a sharp tongue. I wouldn't quote what he said, but it has a negative notation anyway. The negative connotation freely extended to men continues throughout the 19th century, carrying implications of abstractness, coldness, and ineffectiveness. One of the reasons for this negative variation is the hostility to rationalistic social theory. Another is a crucial kind of opposition to groups engaged in intellectual work who, in the course of social development, has acquired some independence from established institutions. So it's actually anti-establishment. Yet it is important to distinguish between this broad sociological way of thinking about intellectuals as a group and a narrower and more normative conception of intellectuals as a small elite of men and women of letters, acting as public spokespersons for the noble disciplines of knowledge, and commenting on the full range of public and intellectual affairs. In the latter sense, the intellectual task of implementing enlightenment and modernity is understood in heroic terms. So we will take the second definition, not the first one. So the term is surprisingly similarly used in Thai. When we refer to Phuak Panyachon as a group, it doesn't have a good meaning. Well, if someone to say something negative about us who are in the university, they are just that intellectuals. But individually, if you say Khao Pen Panyachon, it's okay. He is a Panyachon, just means he is an intellectual, usually carrying a positive connotation. So we would use the term in the later sense, the positive one, and the principle to judge who is an intellectual are thinking and reasoning, education and knowledge, and using them intelligently, and thus having positive impact on the society. Now, the concept of intellectual in the West, starting from the 19th century, actually contemporary with the time of the Queen's mother, who was born in 1862, and she lived a very long life, though. I mean, from Rama IV to Rama IX, and if you think that she lives in the time of Queen Victoria and passed away, I mean, to use a good term, in the time of Queen Elizabeth II. So and she was born in the time of President Lincoln and died in the time of President Eisenhower. So that was, I mean, from the 16th president to the 34th president of the United States. So a very long life anyway. Now, do we have intellectuals, or are there any intellectuals movement in Thailand? I think no societies in the world or cultures that doesn't have intellectuals. Otherwise, it would survive anyway. There would be some group of people who actually do something on knowledge and make something out of knowledge by thinking or reasoning or something like that, and would influence society at large anyway. So, I mean, in Thai society, we might say, Paul Khun Khamhaeng is actually an intellectual. I mean, he actually created the Thai scripts. We might say that King Nitai is written something that's very influential. Right now, we're still talking about this Traipum, or the three worlds. And the idea is there. And we have a lot of monks who wrote something on history, etc., etc. And these books and these works actually influence our thinking all along. But then talking about the female or women intellectuals, there are fewer in a sense, maybe because in the traditional society, studying something is actually belong to the men world, and women were sort of hiding in the back and learning something. But if you glean through all this evidence and literatures, then you will find that women didn't lack intellectuality. They studied, and in one of our literature, Khun Chang Khun Pan, Nang Thong Pasi is one of the intellectuals. You might say she was a common intellectual because she has a lot of knowledge. I mean, she actually taught her son, which is Khun Pan, and taught her grandson, which is Plai Ngam or Prawai, with almost, I mean, from writing and learning and all that, rituals and even some of the spell and all these magical formulas, which is considered to be higher in the education in the past. I mean, you learn how to write and how to read. That was primary. If you want to learn something higher, you learn something magical in a sense. But magical in a sense, and when we get to the university, we learn something magical too because we earn money out of it. Anyway, otherwise we wouldn't have time to sitting here. And it allows us to actually use our intellectualities freely, more freely at least, and broader in a sense. So talking about women intellectuals, we have some women that's actually mentioned in the historical document, like Nang Seung, but we don't know what she did. But she must be important, but otherwise you just omit it, right? You don't really have to refer to something like that. And we have something like Nang Nopamat or Thao Si Chulalak, whether she's a legend or she's not a legend, but she wrote Nang Nopamat. The book is called Nang Nopamat, which is the talking about the rituals or traditional rituals for the 12 months. But there must be something in it that she was actually an intellectual at her time. Whether what we have now actually came directly from her or not, that's another question. But I don't doubt it that she is a historical figure that has some influence on Thai cultures and tradition anyway. And then you have Thao Si Sudachan.